Tiger Woods has told his son Charlie to emulate Rory McIlroy's swing instead of his own. That's quite surprising given how successful Tiger's 2000 swing was. But let's have a look, see how Charlie's swing stacks up against Rory's. So first of all, setup is one of the most important things. Let's have a look. We can see very, very similar. Both nice neutral posture. Arms hang just in front of the shoulders for both of them. A little bit of knee bend. Love that. Both of them look fairly neutral in the grip. Charlie's recently started to weaken his grip in the last couple of years if you look at some of the older swings, but very, very similar in terms of posture in the backswing. So in the setup, sorry. So let's have a look. So let's bring Rory back to shaft parallel. And let's bring Charlie back to the same position. Now slightly different camera angles, but you'll see that Rory takes the club head outside his hands, just like Charlie does. The subtle differences will be that Rory takes his hands a little bit more out towards the ball, whereas Charlie's much more on a straight line. So we'll explain that a little bit more in detail. So if we put Rory here, put a line on his right thumb, and then take Charlie back to set up, put a line on his right thumb, you'll see how his hands just work inside of that red line, whereas Rory will work a little bit more outside. Very subtle. If I'm honest, probably Rory would prefer Charlie's takeaway. It's something that he does work on quite admittedly. He says to himself that his bad habit is hands get out and then the club gets behind him. So I'd probably say Rory would want to copy Charlie here, which is surprising. But let's take him back a little bit further. So we both get really common in good players. You see, some players do get the club behind here, but very few. Most of them, that club head is in line with the hands or in front. So let's bring him back to sort of lead arm parallel. Let's see. So very, very similar position here. There's not a great deal of hip rotation from either of them. Hands are quite deep. Again, it's a very different camera angle, but we can see for a little bit of comparison here. Hands again, sort of similar position in the middle of the chest. Probably argue that Charlie's got a little more upright shaft plane than Rory. Hard to tell as well from the subtle differences in camera angle, but very, very similar in terms of the body position, shoulder tilts, hip tilts, shoulder turn. Very, very similar. So if we bring them up to the top, there's going to be a few little subtle differences, but a lot of similarities. Get rid of these lines for us. If we look at the top of the swing, both of them are a little bit across the line. Charlie's probably, Charlie's a little bit longer in the swing, but I mean, you're talking a few centimeters, not very much. I'd probably say Rory's hands are a little bit lower than Charlie's. As you draw a line there, you'll see that Charlie's hands are a touch higher than Rory's. We'll see as well that Rory will have a little bit more of a cupping in that lead wrist if you have a look, as opposed to Charlie. So if I draw a line, you'll see Charlie's a little bit flatter, whereas Rory will have a little bit of cup in that lead wrist. But apart from that, very, very similar. I mean, we're talking minute details here, but in terms of aesthetically, it's a very, very similar action. We could probably say Charlie's got a little less hip turn as well than Rory. Again, I'd love to get them both on 3D and actually see how much difference there is, but video camera is the best we've got for these two. So very, very similar, but subtle differences. So let's have a look in the transition. You'll see Charlie starts to move really down. Let's have a look at Rory. And again, you'll see that is where I see a big, big similarity. If I'm being really picky, we'll probably see some subtle differences. One, Rory's probably a little bit more aggressive in that down move. If you watch there, Charlie's more like pause and then move down, whereas Rory, it's more of one sort of motion. As he's moving in backswing, he's moving those hips down in downswing, but a very similar action in the fact they both increase that knee flex, drive the pelvis and the rib cage down. We look, that knee flex is increasing from both of them here. Very, very similar body action, although the hands will be and arms will be slightly different. If we compare them, I'd say Charlie's hands are a little bit more in front of his body, whereas Rory's a little bit more behind him. In terms of club face position, you'll see Charlie's face is pointing up to the sky, whereas Rory's a little bit more open. That trail shoulder in Charlie's case, or trail elbow should I say, is probably a little bit more in front of his body, whereas Rory is a little bit more behind. But in terms of the actual body action, very, very similar. Get rid of those lines again, because otherwise it'll get very messy, but very, very similar. Let's bring them down a couple more frames. Let's have a look. Again, can't quite get it on the exact same frame, but again, very, very similar body action is what we're seeing. Similar in terms of the shaft plane, similar in terms of that knee action, although Charlie's probably got a little bit more knee drive. As you can see, that heel's up off the ground, whereas Rory's a little bit more planted, less right knee drive. Again, subtle differences. That arm position for Charlie a little bit more in front of his body, whereas Rory it's a little bit more behind him. So very, very similar in a lot of ways, but very, very different in others. Just to the naked eye or untrained eye, looks very, very similar, but there are subtle differences. See if we can get a couple of frames lower. Again, very, very similar here. You know, we've got similar shaft position, similar club face position, despite Charlie being a little bit stronger initially. Very similar. Again, that knee drive from Charlie a little bit more. Let's bring him down. You'll start to see, just because Rory's a little bit more behind in terms of that elbow, you'll see subtle differences here. Can't quite get them at the same frame, but let's just see if I can get them close. You'll see there how Charlie again is a little bit more knee drive this way. Rory's a little bit more down, but in terms of the rib cage, we're seeing similar amounts of rotation. Rib cage is pointing out here for both of them. We're seeing a little bit release, you know, classic release from them both. Very, very similar. And let's bring them up a couple of frames. Again, really similar. Again, just Charlie's got a little bit more knee drive. Get rid of that line. Similar positions in terms of how the shoulder plane is pitched. Very, very similar. Again, differences really around that knee, how Charlie really drives that knee towards the target, whereas Rory straightens it, backs out of it a little bit. Let's have a look through. Again, very similar. Subtle difference again is that knee drive, and also Charlie's eyes are just making the way out to see the ball a little bit earlier. I'd suggest Rory's probably left eye dominant, so keeps his head down a little bit longer, whereas Charlie's probably right eye dominant, so it allows him to rotate his head a little bit earlier in the downswing than Rory. But again, very similar. Look at how that shaft is dissecting the shoulder plane. Really, really similar. He's doing a great job of emulating Rory, Charlie. And then this position, it's almost identical. Look at that. Exiting left of the shoulder. Look at the club face position, pretty much same position. Even the grip looks very similar. Feet are in a similar position. Unbelievably similar there. Then let's have a look. Again, very, very similar. And the follow through at the finish is pretty much identical. And Charlie does a really good job, just like Rory, of sticking that finish. Look how similar that is. That's unbelievable. So there's a huge amount of similarities in terms of both of the swings. More, I think, in terms of how the body action works in downswing, that initial sort of compression down through the knees, through the legs, through the rib cage and pelvis, really similar in that sort of motion. I'd say Charlie's arms are more in front of him than Rory, but very, very, very similar actions. really great swing from both of them. Charlie's got some really good fundamentals. I'd probably say Charlie's a little bit more classic in terms of that positioning of the hands coming down more in front of his body, whereas Rory, it's a little bit of an idiosyncrasy with him. You don't see many players getting the hands that far behind them at that elite level, but that's just Rory's sort of unicorn status that he can do that. So Charlie, I'd actually say, is more teachable in terms of the fundamentals and how his body works, whereas Rory's a little bit more unique, but both an amazing swing, and he's really done a great job, Charlie, of emulating Rory, especially that finish and that body action of compressing the ground. And I tell you what, when this kid gets of size, he's going to absolutely bomb it with that technique.